recent changes in the market is the move towards vacation rentals and away from all-inclusive package holidays. And of course, that's brought a very different kind of skill set requirement from your revenue manager. Here to tell us more is Queen of Revenue Management Tuition, Janel Clark from HOSPA. Janel, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hi, Jason. Thanks for that intro. Yeah, wow, the Queen. Okay, let's see how we get on with that.
The Queen.
The Queen.
So
A
how are
lot to
you
live
then?
up to. I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, very well. So, looking forward to actually, I've got a holiday coming up next week, and I won't be in a holiday rental. I will be in a hotel.
You will be all
But
inclusive.
no, it's just a little boutique hotel. But I am becoming a bit of a convert, I must admit, to the holiday rental market. I always said I wouldn't, but the last couple of experiences have been very good. So I am becoming a bit of a convert.
Fantastic, fantastic. And of course, that's the way. And this has kind of happened, I suppose. Like Airbnb have kind of propagated this, haven't they, really, coming along and disrupting the market and moving things away from your traditional, which HOSPA's always been associated with hotels. You guys have obviously had to react. But before we kind of get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself, because I think everyone pretty much knows you and knows HOSPA in the industry. But for the few that don't, tell us a little bit about yourself, how your career path through the industry into the position that you're in at the minute.
Okay, so I started in the industry a little bit. I sort of fell into it. I wasn't somebody that wanted to always work in hospitality, and I actually had a job when I first left uni. I had a job where I got to stay. I was working for a band at the time who were quite popular, and I was going on tour with them selling t-shirts. And as
Wow.
part of, yeah, the glamorous life of a merch girl. But we were traveling around the UK and staying in really smart hotels. And I was about 20, I guess. And I'd never really stayed in lovely hotels like this before. And everything was paid for. It was part of my job, obviously. So we would rock up at the next five-star hotel and it was all paid for and you could order room service and it was fabulous. And I did that for a little while. And then the band split up, which was a bit selfish of them. And at probably 21, I thought my life was over and I would never have a job like that again. And I thought, how do I become this five-star guest who just travels around and stays in hotels all the time for free? And so I thought there must be a job out there where you can do that, although I didn't know what the job was. So I thought if I go to work in hospitality somewhere, that job will be there. And so then I went to work for what was Holiday Inn back then, and they had a call centre, Central Res in London, and that was my first job there. And then I went through sort of the reservations, and then onto property reservations, then yield managers, as we were called, and revenue management, and sort of went through that path then through property for about, I don't know, probably 12 years or so. And I like being a guest, and that's why it's quite surprising to a lot of people now that I'm enjoying the short-term rental and the Airbnbs of this world rather than hotels, because I've always been such a hotel person, as a hotel guest. I like people making my bed for me when I go out for the day and, things like that. But yeah, so I moved from property. I was very lucky, actually. I think timing was very important as well, because I was working on property and becoming, learning revenue management as the world was changing, as the internet came in, distribution changed, pricing changed, the OTAs came in. And I was working then for a very smart boss who would send me, it was a small hotel group, but they would send me to the States to go to HSMAI conferences, HEDNA conferences, to keep up to date with what was happening over there, and then bring it back to our hotel group. So although revenue management was very new still at that time, particularly in the UK, I was very lucky that I was getting exposed to a lot more than than I may have done if I'd have been working somewhere else. And then I went on to supplier side. I sort of worked for this group for a while and was worked in various properties in central London and in the regions, and then went on to be director of revenue management for that group. But there wasn't really anywhere for me to go after that. I never wanted to be a GM. And so I went on the supplier side, and I worked for, first of all, for Travel Click. And at that time, as I say, it was sort of it was probably about 2004, I think. And that time the internet was becoming a really big disruptor for us. And my job at Travel Click was I had a portfolio of around 60 hotels around Europe. And my role was to explain to them that they needed to move from the static pricing that they were so used to onto dynamic pricing, best available rate. The distribution was changing, and there was a lot of resistance that from these hotels, the all independent properties, to understand why they should do this. No one will ever accept this. And I think that was probably my first taste of that education side of things, of actually teaching these hotels and educating them as to what was happening and why they should be making these changes, and then going back and reviewing results with them. I think that probably gave me the bug for education and training. So I sort of went from a couple of different suppliers that I worked on that tech side, working with hotels as clients and just training and educating and training companies, delivering trainings around Europe and the Middle East for companies like small luxury hotels, leading hotels of the world, people like that. Again, always focused on revenue management, reservations, a bit of sales, but really I'm a revenue person. And then into some lecturing. So I did some work with some of the hotel schools and ended up running programs in Lausanne for EHL, and more recently with Glion in London and ESSEC in Paris. So that I sort of geared much more then towards teaching and the training. I still believe I still think I'm a revenue manager, but I don't do it, hands on anymore. In 2017, I think I joined HOSPA as a tutor. So I run the revenue management programs for HOSPA. So HOSPA are an association, for those who don't know, focused around hospitality professionals, networking, events, education, keeping everyone up to date with what's happening in the industry, with new trends and technology and that sort of thing. And we have this education professional development department. So I manage the courses that we run through HOSPA. And as I say, I'm responsible for the revenue management programs. And more recently, as you mentioned, we've offered or developed a revenue management program for holiday rentals, so short-term rentals. So that's now we're in our second cohort. We're just finishing the second cohort of that course, which has been available now for almost a year. So that came about, I think, again, because of the way that the industry, as you mentioned, the way that people are choosing to go on holiday, people are choosing the different alternative accommodation, I guess, rather than hotels. And I think it's probably almost 10 years ago now that we first started talking about the bleisure segment of this mixture between business and leisure. And we talked about that. Pardon?
That long ago?
Yeah, I think so. I remember in 2015 we were running a program, the company I was working for then, and we were talking about bleisure segments. And that wasn't, that was sort of 2015. So almost like 8-9 years. And I think it's that way that people have chosen now to take their holidays, and different, as I say, different choices of accommodation that's out there. I think hotels even then, hotels weren't really understanding that there was too much of a competition, I guess, from these sort of, let's say Airbnb type properties. I think hotels recognize it a lot more now, especially since the pandemic, but this was something that was happening before. And I think, that whole trend of the staycation as well was happening again before the pandemic, but has even increased now because of, people experimenting with holidays, maybe having to choose alternatives to hotels and looking more at the short-term rental market and the holiday markets, cottage rentals or holiday parks and that sort of thing. And that sector is huge, particularly in the US, but in the UK and Europe, it is still a huge market. And it's been a bit ignored when it comes to things like education and training. So we were having, at HOSPA, we were having people come on the course, on our revenue management courses, who were not working in hotels, but were working for holiday rental companies, holiday parks. And what was happening was, when all the content would be focused on hotels, but when they did the assignments, because they couldn't relate to how the hotels were working, I would be rewriting the assignment for them, so that, if you had 20 learners, you might have 18 people doing one assignment and then 2 people from the holiday rental market. So I'd rewrite an assignment and give it to them to tweak it to their particular sector. And so we recognized that there was becoming more and more a need for revenue management training for that sector, particularly because of the, some of the differences between them and hotels. And so we developed this program last year, and as I say, it's now up and running.
I think it's really interesting. You guys have obviously had to be quite nimble, haven't you, in kind of catering for the way that the market's adapting and has changed over time.
Yeah.
What are the different in what ways do the skill set requirements differ from hotels to holiday rental? Speaking specifically about RM.
I think the basics of revenue management are the same, right? So, if you've got that sort of revenue management knowledge and you understand that the basics of the discipline, then that's great. I think obviously in a hotel, quite often the revenue manager is on property, so they understand more about how the operation works. Whereas with a lot of the holiday rental companies, the revenue management team are offsite and they're centralized somewhere, so they don't have that same knowledge of how sites work operationally. I think that's that can be a benefit and also a disadvantage. The benefit is that they're away, so they're almost making unemotional decisions. You're just looking at data and you're making decisions on pricing and whatever. And you haven't got the guests around you, and you haven't got the operational team around you. And it's the same if you're working for hotel in a sort of central res environment. But then from the negative side, you don't get that feedback from the guests either. So you don't necessarily have the same touch points on things like value and the guest experience and how that's relating back to the prices that you're putting out there to sell. So I think that's one difference from working in RM for holiday rental company versus hotel. From the actual skills that you need, there's a lot more, I would say with the holiday rentals, there's a lot more data available, but they track data differently. So data insights, analytical skills, they're important for both sides, but just in a slightly different way. I think with the holiday rental companies, they do tend to have internal systems and systems that they've self-developed, whereas with hotels, we have much more wider range of tools available, I would guess. I think, that the skills, I don't really know. I don't know that they're different. I think the analytical side of things is much stronger with the holiday rental teams the ones that I've dealt with, but they don't have the hands-on people experience, which I think are just as important from a revenue management perspective. I think the way that revenue management has evolved, those skills are becoming more important.
Yeah. In your opinion, has the because the growth of these kind of companies has been quite rapid, has the tech stack caught up with that, or do you find that some of these companies are quite Excel based? I certainly know, in my opinion, I can think of one or two that are still heavy Excel users,
Yeah,
and one or two that maybe aren't. Is it a case of the tech stack still catching up, in your opinion?
I think the tech stacks that they use, like I say, are quite often internally developed. So this is like our bespoke reservation system that we use at this. There's not such a wide range of tech available for them, so that's where I think you get the it's this overused expression of working in silos, but I think we get that even more with the holiday parks and those holiday rental companies, even more than you do with the hotels. I think,
Yeah.
It's the integration of systems, isn't it? Always
Always.
it's still a challenge. Yeah, it's
I
still
know
a
from
challenge.
bitter experience, but I suppose if you've got these mounds of data but quite rudimentary systems to wrangle it, then the skill set maybe would be more for someone working in RM to be advanced Excel, maybe SQL. Would those
Yeah,
skills suit someone going into that sector, do you think?
yeah, I think they would. I think they yeah, I think they would. I'm trying to think, because they do seem to have more, especially some of the companies that I've worked alongside with. They have like more data scientists and the development, like the tech developers in house than we would see in hotels.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can certainly see that from my vantage point as well. So my students watching, get upskilling in advanced Excel, do the HOSPA course, have a look at
Yeah,
SQL, and you'll be the revenue star of tomorrow's
yeah,
vacation rental game.
yeah. I think there's a lot of opportunities for revenue managers in the vacation rental, the holiday rental sector. And one of the advantages, I guess, as well, is that you are off property. So it is a sort of Monday to Friday office hours, as opposed to working hospitality hours. So for those revenue managers that are in small hotels and, are doing everything, because we see a lot of that. I see a lot of that at the moment with the learners that we have in HOSPA. You're the revenue manager, but that's one day while you've got that hat on, but then the next day you're checking in, you're checking out, your DM, all of these other things that are taking up your time. So obviously the same if you're in a hotel head office, you're removed away from that, or a central office, you're removed away. So there's some advantages to that for working for one of the holiday rentals.
Yeah, and I certainly remember it myself. I worked in independent hotels, and yeah, you're doing RM or you're doing whatever you're doing, but then the tour turns up and there's no one to put the bags in the lift and get them up to the fourth floor. So you're putting the bags in and then you're helping on check-in. And then, hey, it's Christmas. We don't have enough people to serve, and we've got 10,000 people through the doors in the calendar month. So you're serving today. So,
Yeah,
which is great. You want to be a team player, but obviously being offsite gives you that chance to really zero in on what you want to do, which is revenue management. So
yeah.
yeah.
I think because also with the differences between the two sectors, it's not a different skill set really, but it's just learning, different ways of working. Because if you think of things like length of stay, in hotels, we're generally very flexible about length of stay. And when we start to put restrictions in place, it's generally because we can see there's demand there and we're trying to, yield and manage that demand. Whereas with the short-term rentals, those length of stays are less flexible. So they will work a lot more on a 3-night stay, 4-night stay, or a 7-night stay. So you've got, your week is a 3 and a 4 and then a 7. So it's just getting your head around how does that work, and things like what we call trapped nights. So if an owner of a cottage wants to stay over a weekend and then they'll stay an extra night of, let's say, the Monday, then that Tuesday, Wednesday, they won't sell because they're trapped in before the Thursday 4-night stay kicks in, because that's the way the systems are set up. So again, it can be a bit rigid, and so there's different ways of thinking about it's the same things that we would do in hotels, but you're just doing it in a slightly different way. So that inventory management will just work slightly differently. I think that, there's also, they're much more seasonal when they look at pricing and things like that. They're much more talking about peaks and off peaks, much more than we would in hotel. I think in hotels we're much more sort of fluid with our demand, whereas they're more structured with when's off peak, when's peak, what month is that, what week is that, and this is for that week. And they look much more, in my experience, much more that week by week by week, whereas we in hotels, I think we're looking at days, because we can have a 1-night stay, whereas they won't work with a 1-night stay quite often. So
do you feel like there's a greater potential to optimize revenue based on features versus hotels? Say, I just think about hotels, and you may have 60 double rooms, like they face one way, they face the other way, but they're pretty much to all intents and purposes the same. However, when I think about holiday rentals, surely there is a greater, I don't know, you could optimize based on the sun setting in front of the lounge window, or the features and the attributes tend to be more varied. To me, as a former revenue manager, I get excited just thinking about ways that you could price that. Is there a need for someone to come on board, a revenue manager, to have those really sharp pricing skills and to look at things and just to think we could optimize that and charge more for that, charge less for that? See how excited I am about this, can't you?
I know, you're creating this chaos. With, like, imagine if you look at a holiday park and you've got, I don't know, 200 outlets or units on this holiday park, and you've got probably 200 different type of units as well. And I think you're right that features, they things like, since the pandemic, I know that hot tubs and pet friendly are the key features that they have to have now. So you've got to have a hot tub, and you've got to be pet friendly for holiday rentals. But I think generally they tend to, if we're looking at a holiday rental like inventory, as opposed to looking at from a hotel, I don't know, standard, superior, deluxe, they'll look at a sleeps. So from a holiday rental perspective, we're looking at sleeps 4, sleeps 6, sleeps 12, and tend to look at those units differently because obviously of the capacity of the unit. But then on a holiday park, you could have 10 sleeps 10s, you could have 100 sleeps 4s, you could have, so it's very complicated, just the number of units they have and the difference in the units, and looking at that. And I think there could be more flexibility probably in things like you could upgrade a sleeps 2 to a sleeps 4 because it will give them more space. If you can't, on those periods when the sleeps 4 don't sell because it's not family, it's school term time or whatever. But I think that's a little bit static still, quite often because of the systems they use as well.
Yeah, the tech stack. Yeah,
the text won't allow it. I think you could there's opportunity to have more fluidity, is that the right word?
Yeah,
But well, as always, it's the tech that
it's
stops
limited
us,
by the
right?
tech. Yeah,
Yeah,
of
yeah,
course, of course.
yeah.
I'm confusing things enormously for these companies.
Well, you are.
Things will. Yeah, I mean, there's the potential there, but as you say, you've got to have the systems behind it. But
Yeah,
do you see this sector continuing to grow? Obviously, it it boomed massively, didn't it, in COVID?
yeah.
Do you see? I presume now things have calmed down because inevitably you're going to have a certain proportion of people, percentage of people that during COVID booked holiday homes have now, like
Mm-mm.
me, for instance, now gone back on a plane and gone abroad, albeit
Yeah.
just managed to get back before the plane chaos last week. But do you see the sector continuing to grow, Janel?
Yeah, I do, definitely. I think, well, like myself, I think people have experienced, not through choice, have experienced a holiday cottage or a holiday let and actually
Mm.
found that they've enjoyed it, and the
I can take the
freedom that you
dog.
have. Well, you can take your dog, um, but it's the freedom that you've got. I was always sort of, like I said earlier, I like someone to make my bed when I go out for the day. I like to
Yeah,
think that I can go downstairs and get a sandwich or get a drink or whenever I want to, and I don't want to have to be doing that myself. And I think probably when my kids were younger, I like to go to a hotel because otherwise I'd be looking after, I'd be doing everything for the kids, and
yeah,
it'd be like,
yeah,
oh God, if we, if I think then probably conversations that I had 10 years ago, I would be saying, I'm not going to a villa in Spain, for example, because that means that mum is making breakfast every day, mum is
mm.
making lunch every day while the kids are in the pool, and that's not a holiday for me.
No, you do that every
However,
day of your life
yeah,
anyway.
that's it. So, however, I can see now that there is that flexibility that you don't get in a hotel where people can go into another room and do something, or if someone wants to be eating at a different time, they can, and there's just like a more relaxed feel than you have sometimes in a hotel or in a more sort of structured environment, if you like. So I'm
Yeah,
still a massive advocate for hotels. I'm not giving up on hotels at all, but I can also see now that if we went on a hiking holiday, for example, I would be quite happy now to stay in little cottages along the way rather than hotels,
yeah,
thinking, well, when I get there after my long walk for the day, I can go and put a TV on in one room and someone else can go into another room and do something else, and then we can just walk to a pub and get dinner or whatever it is, and there's just a bit
yeah,
more. I feel like there's a bit more flexibility. So for me personally, I think I've just late to the party a little bit, but am now really seeing the advantages. And I think there are millions of people out there that have been doing this for a long time. And if you look at the numbers, you are really talking, you know, I think if you look on people like Centre Parks and Park Dean and those sort of holiday resorts, they have millions of customers every year that are
mm.
using them. And I think as well, sadly, that hotels are struggling at the moment with staffing levels and being able to deliver service that they could deliver before. I think, our recruitment is a real problem for us in the industry. So I think that hotels are struggling with costs as well. And so we are charging more and we are delivering less quite often. And I
Mm.
think guests will see that, and then there are a lot of alternatives out there now for the guest, and I think that sector will continue to grow. I think we don't realize in the UK how big the sector is. And like I say,
Yeah,
even from a revenue management perspective, when we started to put this program together, most of the research and the articles I was reading and the podcasts I was listening to and everything was from the US, because it's such a huge market over there, and there was nothing really here in the UK that I could pull from. So there was,
mm.
I think there's a huge amount of potential. There's a lot of potential for people to go and work in the whole revenue management side, because that's getting bigger. The teams are getting bigger, and they are getting more sophisticated. And they like people as well. They do like people from hotels, because we have good experience of things like pricing and demand and inventory management, but also we do have the understanding more of demand and willingness to pay and pricing and how it all fits in together, and the guest reviews and experience. And we're quite sophisticated now in hotels at revenue management, I'm pleased to say, and also finally getting the recognition that we deserve. And I think from other sectors, they like to have hotel people because we bring a good insight.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with so much of what you said. Just going back, there's so much to unpack, but the ability, more and more people in lockdown got a pet. You can take your dog, but also people want now, compared to 20 years ago, more and more out of life in terms of experience. So that even if a proportion of people in lockdown that books vacation rentals now go abroad and don't, there's still those other weekends during the year where you can finish work on a Friday and you got your Friday, 3-night stays and go away for a mini break. I do it, several times a year as much as I can. There's always going to be that market where you don't have to put the dog in a kennel. You can take the dog with you. And there's that want to explore. An Airbnb would call it a neighborhood, wouldn't there? There's that want to explore neighborhoods and not be tied down to an all-inclusive. We were considering on holiday all-inclusive, or do we go villa or apartment? And apartment, one, simply because I don't want to be in that room with just the three of us, where my son is a nightmare. He makes us go to bed. He's only 8, but he makes us go to bed all at the same time, like if we're in a hotel room. But if we're in, say, a villa or an apartment, we can put him to bed like we would at home and go and have a glass of sangria on the balcony or outside in the garden. So yeah, I think it's here to stay. I think you're absolutely right. So, and I think it's a great thing for students listening to be aware that it's an option, that you guys are providing a course that caters to that market, and for students to be considering it as a viable career option in revenue management. It's not just hotels, there's other things out there. So I think it's fantastic what you guys are doing. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I know you're off next week, and then you're obviously, you've got your new boatload of learners to rig up with everything they need to learn the week after. So you're obviously super busy. So I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your thoughts on vacation rental with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
That's all we've got time for this week. So like and share, because it helps the channel, and we'll see you again soon.